Traveling and exploring the outdoors is one of my favorite activities. I visited several national parks and hiking trails in recent years. I didn't travel very much until about 3 years ago, when I changed jobs. With my new job, I have a lot more free time to travel. Anyway, this story takes place a few years ago, when I was relatively new to traveling. I visited a national park that I was excited about. It wasn't particularly popular, but it did have some good hiking trails. I traveled there by myself and began hiking in the morning. There were numerous trails in the park, and after completing one, I went to the nearby town. After hanging out there for a while, I got the itch to go hiking again, so I returned later that afternoon. The park was not overly crowded. It was large and spread out, so it depended on which trails and sections you visited. Travel to a different location to go hiking. There were many different types of terrain, including hills, mountains, and woods. What I didn't realize was that this trail was significantly longer and more complex than the other. I'm sure if I had looked at a sign at the start, I would have noticed that it was more difficult, but I don't remember seeing anything like that. I basically just went on the trail and started. I didn't notice anyone else on the trail. To begin with, it was very quiet, which I enjoyed. But soon I was going farther and farther, and I realized it was getting late. The sun would be setting in approximately 30 minutes. I went a little farther before deciding to turn back. There were several areas where the trail diverged, sometimes splitting 3 ways. Meanwhile, I'd only seen a few people the whole time, and they were all near the beginning. I tried going back, but I quickly became confused about which direction I was going. I blamed it on the terrain because there were many areas where you had to climb up or down rocks, which were also used as stairs in some places. So I was trying to find my way back for about 30 minutes before it got really dark outside. At that point, I realized I wasn't making very much progress. Pulled out my phone, but it had no signal. I never had a good signal while I was at the park. Turned my phone off and then back on, but nothing happened. So as I was walking back in what I thought to be the right direction, I heard something. It sounded like someone was walking behind me on the trail. I turned around and saw a man walking behind me. I paused and waited for him to catch up. He wore black pants and a black shirt and had long dark brown hair. However, he was also wearing a hat and sunglasses. I wasn't sure where he had come from, but I was relieved he was here. I said hello to him, and he returned the greeting. I told him I wasn't sure which way out, and he immediately said he knew. The man told me he hiked this trail many times before and knew it like the back of his hand. Told him where I had parked, and he said he could lead me there. Felt much better after hearing that, and the man directed me to follow him. Then we both began hiking back. During this time, he said nothing to me and moved quickly. I didn't say much back to him either. I assumed he was moving quickly because it was getting darker and darker outside. We hiked for about 20 minutes before I began to question him, because despite the fact that I got lost and am clearly not the best with directions, I had a feeling we were going the wrong direction. One of the turns he took was clearly incorrect, but I didn't say anything because who was I to criticize? I got myself lost. After about 10 minutes, it appeared that we were only getting deeper. We passed by places I was certain I had never been to. I was hoping there was some kind of shortcut. We were about to arrive right at the path's entrance, but that didn't happen. I finally asked him how far it would be. He claimed that it wasn't much farther and told me to keep following him. After about 5 minutes and still nothing, I wasn't sure if he was lost or leading me astray. We kept going, and I noticed we were heading for some dense woods. He then said, "It's right over here." I knew this was not it. There was no parking lot in sight, and the terrain was nothing like where I had entered. I said it didn't look like where I had gone in, and I asked him if there were multiple connecting parking lots. Perhaps he mistook it for another. The guy simply said no, and that was it. He was still walking ahead of me. At that point, he began to climb down this extremely steep section of rock. I just wanted to be away from him. As soon as he got down and I was about to get down, I turned and ran. I went in the opposite direction and began sprinting down the trail away from him. When I first started running away, I could hear him climbing back up the rocks. It would give me a good head start on him, though. I had no plan at all. I was simply winging it. Just felt in danger, like the guy was leading me into the woods. After running about 50 feet, I went through some really tall grass and bushes where I could be hidden. Just kept going through them until I found a connecting trail. Soon, I could no longer hear the guy behind me. Then, I slowed down. I felt better, but it was still dark outside, and I was lost. I walked quickly, trying to move in the direction I thought was correct. I walked for about another 20 minutes. Soon, I heard someone walking up ahead again. I quickly identified the person as a park ranger. I approached him and asked how he got out. Of course he did, and I followed suit. The ranger was very nice, and I told him about the guy I had met. He seemed concerned and stated that the man was not leading me near any exits. He radioed in and reported it, and when we got back to the parking lot, he said he'd investigate. After that, I left for the rest of my trip, and ever since then, I've been much more careful. I visited the Grand Canyon over the summer a few years ago. I went there on a road trip with Amanda, my best friend. I had never been to the Grand Canyon, but she had once when she was younger. We spent a long time driving down this one road that led to the park. Once inside, we took another road to one of the main parking lots. I was surprised at how big the park was, and there are campsites on it, and several trails. When we arrived, there were several other people. We went down one trail to see the canyon. There are walking trails alongside it, as well as numerous lookout points. We walked along it, stopping at a few of the lookout points, many of which were quite crowded. This one guy approached me at probably the second one I remember. He was a big man with dark hair, and he greeted me. He told me his name was Joe. Then he asked me and Amanda if we wanted to go on a tour and explained that he drove a guided tour. I wasn't and said no thank you. Then he asked if I was certain, and I replied yes. Then he walked away. We took a bunch of pictures and then moved on. About 15 minutes later, I believe we arrived at another overlook area. There were other people present, but not as many. I saw the same guy, Joe, walking over. He then approached us again. This time, he explained that he had forgotten to mention that the tour was free because someone else had canceled. He asked again if we wanted to go. Thought about it for a second, but still didn't want to go, so I told him no. He asked if we were sure again, and we said yes. He walked away again. It seemed strange. He wasn't going around asking anyone else, only us. He walked away and back down a path, while Amanda and I remained in the lookout spot for a few more minutes. After that, we continued walking along the canyon, stopping at various viewpoints. Recall stopping at a spot later and seeing Joe again, this time a short distance away. I was afraid he would approach us again, but he didn't. He was with another guy, and they were just standing there. Amanda and I then walked in a different direction. There were a few paths that led through nearby areas, and there were fewer people on them. We walked down a few of the paths. Remember seeing Joe about halfway through one of the trails we went on. He was walking a long way behind us. That's when I started to feel creeped out by him. Still, it didn't seem like a big deal because there were other people around, and the paths weren't completely blocked. We later returned to the canyon and did not see him. We finished up at the gift shop, where we each got some souvenirs. Guess who I saw again at the gift shop? Joe was with his friend. He did not approach us, but it was unusual to see him. Were they following us? I assumed they had tours to give, but they clearly did not. By the time we got our souvenirs, it was getting late and the sun was setting. We opted to drive back because our hotel was more than an hour away. We returned to my car and what I assume is the main parking lot, which was quite large. When we got to my car, noticed the two guys. They were a long way away and had just entered the parking lot. I kept an eye on them, as I was suspicious. I noticed them look over at us before proceeding to an older-looking SUV parked on the opposite side of the lot. Is this what they were supposed to be giving tours of? I wasn't buying the tour story and was relieved that we didn't say yes to them. We got into my car and began to leave, but as we drove down the road to exit the park, the SUV that the guys were driving followed us. If my memory serves me correctly, there is only one main highway that leads to and from the Grand Canyon, and there isn't much along it for about an hour. But there are a few restaurants and gas stations just outside the park. We decided to get some gas because my car's tank was getting low and we didn't know where we'd be able to fill up. The guys arrived at the gas station after us. We were very concerned. I began filling up my car with gas, while the SUV remained parked on the side. Nobody got out. After I finished fueling, Amanda and I went inside the store. We were planning to get some snacks. The gas station was fairly large inside, and we were browsing when we noticed the same two guys enter. We tried to avoid them, and they didn't appear to be trying to approach us, but I knew it wasn't a coincidence. Several years ago, I traveled for work alone. I was on a road trip across several states. On the way home, I passed through some of South Dakota, which I had never visited before. I knew Mount Rushmore was nearby, so I went a little out of my way to see it. I followed the directions to the park and remembered arriving sometime in the afternoon. It happened a little later, but I didn't have much control over it. There was still enough daylight that I should be able to see it. The park has several parking lots, some of which are on multiple levels. I went to one lot at the top, and there was a quiet road nearby with some trees on the other side. There were a few other cars in the parking lot when I arrived, but it wasn't crowded. After parking, I got out and walked to the park. It wasn't a particularly long walk. Soon saw the mountain, and the majority of the other people were also there. I stayed there for a while just looking at the view and taking pictures. Many people started to head out not long after I got there. Before I knew it, I was one of the only people left. The sun was setting, and then I decided to go back and hit the road. Exited the park and returned to the parking lot, where my car was. I remember walking over to the parking lot and not seeing anyone else. I'd noticed some other people going into one of the parking lots on the other side. My car was probably one of fewer than 10 that remained. As I was walking, something caught my attention, and I heard a noise. It was coming from across the quiet road, just inside the woods. I looked over and saw only a tree branch moving, but nothing else. I thought it might be an animal. There are a lot of interesting wild animals in that area, so I stopped and continued looking. I didn't see anything until I noticed a man step out. I thought this was strange, but it was even stranger when the man began walking towards me, and he was moving quickly. Walked faster and soon arrived at my car. When I was unlocking it and getting inside, I noticed the man sprinting towards me. That prompted me to get in the car even faster. Immediately started the engine and drove away. The man did not approach my car. Looked around to see if I could see him, and I only caught a glimpse of him as he walked away from the parking lot. I drove around to the exit and then took one of the quieter roads leading out of the park. There were some roads that wound through the woods. They were winding and required a slow pace. I drove on it, and about halfway to the park exit, I noticed the guy emerge from the woods. He must have run there. He walked straight into the middle of the street. When I saw him, I had to slow down. However, I was able to get around him, and he only stared at me. Then I got past him and quickly left the park. After that, I called to report his strange behavior. I'm not sure who that guy was or what he was doing, but it was very strange. This story takes place when I visited Yellowstone National Park with some friends. Obviously, the park is massive, and there are hiking trails to explore. That was what my group planned to do on the day of the story. We spent 3 days in the area, and today was the last day. There were 7 of us in total, which is a decent number. We started hiking along one of the trails. I'm not sure which one it was, but it went through a lot of woods and past some streams and such. It was one of the best trails I'd ever been on, and I was thoroughly enjoying it. However, my group quickly split up. Everybody was going at their own pace. Some people would stop and look at something, while others continued to walk. I was one of those who got caught in the back for a while. It was just me and 2 other people. The others were out of sight. We didn't think much of it, however. Then I came to a halt at a stream, assuming that everyone else had done the same. I was looking at something, but I quickly realized they didn't stop and continued walking. Now I was all alone in the back. Still, it wasn't a big deal because I assumed I could easily catch up to them. I resumed walking on the path, moving quickly so that I could catch up after the stream. The trail passed through dense woods. I hadn't been there long when I heard a noise ahead of me. I wasn't sure what it was until a woman emerged from the woods. This confused me because I didn't recognize her. She walked out right in front of me and asked if I could assist her. When I asked what was going on, she explained that her friend needed some assistance. Then she instructed me to follow her and began walking back into the woods. There was a very small trail leading into the woods that did not appear to be a proper trail. It was either an animal trail or the woman's return walk. I had no idea why her friend needed help, but I followed her into the woods. It was pretty thick in there, and we were walking over rocks and tall grass and such. The visibility was not optimal. I followed her further and further into the woods. This went on for probably about 5 minutes. I couldn't believe we were going so far back. It made me wonder why she was so far back here. Finally, we came to this small clearing. The woman entered, and I was about to leave, but I noticed 2 large men standing around. They were all wearing the old white hockey goalie masks, which were extremely creepy looking. That was enough to get me to turn around and start running back. There was no friend requiring assistance, just 2 men in masks. I didn't think about it. I was just running and getting hit by tree branches left and right. I heard someone start running after me, which pushed me to go even faster. I'm not sure who was chasing me, whether it was just one of them or all 3. Nobody said anything, but we were simply running for a while. I didn't stop, and luckily, I was in good shape from running every day. I was able to avoid stopping until I returned to the regular trail. By that point, I hadn't heard anyone running after me, so when I returned to the trail, I went in the same direction as my friends. Just a few moments later, I noticed one of my friends approaching me again. She had been looking for me and wanted to know what was going on. I told her to keep moving, and we jogged together for a while. When I was certain that we weren't being pursued, I slowed down and told her the entire story. We decided to report it to park rangers, but the phone signal was intermittent, so it took some time before we could. We eventually caught up with the rest of the group, and I never let them out of my sight after that. I didn't see those people again during my stay in Yellowstone, and I'm not sure what was going on. I hope it wasn't too bad, but I don't know what it was. This occurred several months ago. I was at a national park that I had visited by myself. I enjoy hiking as a hobby, and I don't live too far from this park, so I went there and hiked on some of their many trails. Ended up walking more than 30,000 steps that day, and by the time I was finished and on my way home, I was exhausted. The trail I hiked led to a parking lot that was usually fairly quiet. It was surrounded by mostly woods, and when I returned, the sun had set. I went back to my car and got in. At the time, my car was the only one in the parking lot. When I got inside my car, I checked my phone. I was texting back to some friends because I hadn't used my phone for the majority of the day. I should have left right away, but I decided not to. I was just relaxing on my phone for a few minutes. I was looking at my screen rather than my surroundings. Out of nowhere, I heard a knocking coming from my passenger side window. I looked over and saw nothing. I was confused and creeped out. I kept looking, but no one was there. Then I looked around the whole parking lot. It wasn't well lit, and it was dark outside, but I couldn't see anything. Then I sat up and leaned over to look out the passenger window. When I did, just barely, I noticed someone crouched down. Whoever it was right up against my passenger side door. Then they tried to open the door. I heard the door handle being grabbed, but fortunately it was locked. When that happened, I immediately put my car in drive, hit the gas pedal, and began driving away. When I did, the individual stood up. I could see it was a man, but I couldn't tell anything else about him. He ran alongside my car for a few seconds, still touching it and attempting to keep pace. Then I went too fast, and he stopped. I noticed him in my rearview mirror, standing in the middle of the parking lot. I left and returned to the road. When I got there, I called 911 and reported the guy. After that, I was able to get back home safely. Since then, I have not returned to that park. I'm not sure who that guy was or what he was doing. It was extremely bizarre. I hope nothing like that happens again.